Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Charleston, West Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1898. Charleston, West Virginia was experiencing unprecedented growth following decades of industrial development in the Kanawha Valley. Coal and salt industries had transformed the sleepy town into a bustling hub of commerce. The streets of the capital city teemed with horse-drawn carriages and the newly wealthy who had made their fortunes in the state's abundant natural resources. The Kanawha River, which bisects the city, carried constant steamboat traffic, bringing goods and visitors from as far away as Pittsburgh and New Orleans. According to public records from the Charleston Historical Society, housed in the basement archives of the Kanawha County Public Library, this period marked the height of what locals called the salt aristocracy, families who had amassed considerable wealth through control of the salt wells along the Kanawha River. These families built elaborate mansions along what is now Kanawha Boulevard, each attempting to outdo the others in grandeur and opulence. Among these elite families were the Vandergriffs, whose Victorian mansion stood prominently on the corner of Virginia Street and Kanawha Boulevard, overlooking the river. The house, completed in 1892, featured 3 stories of red brick with distinctive turrets and wraparound porches that were the envy of Charleston society. Photographs preserved in the West Virginia State Archives show a formidable structure with darkened windows that seem to watch passers-by with an almost sentient awareness. According to tax records and census data, the Vandergriff family consisted of Augustus Vandergriff, a prominent coal investor who had diversified into salt production, his wife Eleanor, and their 3 children, twins Victoria and Vincent, aged 16, and young Thomas, aged 9. Though Augustus was listed as a coal and salt magnate, whispers among Charleston's elite suggested his wealth had more mysterious origins. Society columns in the Charleston Daily Mail from 1895 make vague references to Old World connections and unusual business dealings abroad. The family employed several household staff, including a gardener, a driver, a butler, and 3 maids. Employment records found in a ledger book during the estate sale of 1901 list the staff by name and wage. Among these maids was Sarah Blackwood, age 22, who had come from the rural community of Clendenin, about 30 miles northeast of Charleston along the Elk River. Sarah had been employed by the family for approximately 7 months, when in October of 1898, she disappeared without explanation. What makes this case particularly notable is what was discovered 64 years later, in 1962, when renovations to the old Vandergriff property revealed a hidden compartment beneath the kitchen floor containing what appeared to be Sarah's personal journal. The journal, now preserved in the West Virginia State Archives Special Collections under catalog number MMSS at 1898 BLK February 7, contains entries spanning from April through October of 1898. The final entry was dated October 17th, 3 days before Sarah was reported missing by the Vandergriff family. The weathered pages, bound in faded leather with a simple brass clasp, tell a story far more disturbing than a simple case of a servant abandoning her position, a common occurrence in that era. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington, who authenticated the journal for the State Archives in 1963, noted, "The handwriting shows progressive deterioration over the 6 months of entries, suggesting increasing stress or trauma experienced by the writer. Chemical analysis of stains on the later pages confirmed the presence of both human blood and salt residue consistent with preservation techniques of the period." Sarah Blackwood's journal begins innocuously enough. In her first entries, she expresses gratitude for securing employment with such a prestigious family. April 3, 1898. Today marks my first week with the Vandergriff household. The mansion is grander than any building I've ever entered. The floors gleam with polish, and the walls are covered with paintings in heavy gold frames. Mrs. Vandergriff seems pleased with my work, though she is particular about the kitchen. She insists I never enter without her express permission when she is preparing the family's special teas and tonics. The other staff say she is protective of her family recipes, brought from the old country. This seemingly innocent restriction would later take on a more sinister aspect. A letter of reference for Sarah, found among employment records at the Kanawha County Historical Society, described her as diligent, observant, and of good moral character. It was signed by Reverend Josiah Thornton of the Clendenin Methodist Episcopal Church. Interviews conducted in 1964 with elderly residents of Clendenin revealed that Sarah had been orphaned at age 14 and raised by her maternal aunt. She was remembered as quiet but kind and always watching, like she was trying to memorize everything around her. Tax records from 1897 show that Augustus Vandergriff had recently expanded the kitchen, adding a peculiar extension that did not match the architectural style of the rest of the home. According to building permits filed with the city, this renovation included the installation of unusually thick walls, a reinforced floor, and a ventilation system that connected to the main chimney. The contractor who performed this work, a Mr. Jeremiah Holcomb, died under somewhat mysterious circumstances just 3 months after completing the project. His death certificate, located in the Kanawha County Records Office, lists heart failure as the cause, though he was only 41 years old and had no known health issues. A previously overlooked detail discovered during research in 1967 was that Holcomb had requested payment in full before the project's completion, unusual for construction contracts of the period. His widow, interviewed for a local newspaper story about historic homes in 1947, mentioned that her husband had returned from the Vandergriff job changed somehow, and that he had burned his work clothes and tools in their backyard fire pit the night after finishing the kitchen renovation. Sarah's journal entries from May 1898 begin to show signs of unease. May 12th. The kitchen smells strange at night, not like a normal kitchen should. There's something acrid beneath the usual cooking scents, almost like the tanning shed back home where they cured hides. Mrs. Vandergriff spends hours there after dinner, mixing her concoctions. The other maids say it's just her medicines for Mr. Vandergriff's condition, but I've noticed the entire family drinks these preparations at dinner, all except young Thomas, who refuses them and is often sent to bed without supper as punishment. May 23rd. Today I assisted Mrs. Vandergriff with carrying groceries to the kitchen pantry. I noticed a new rug covering part of the floor that hadn't been there before. When I offered to straighten it, she became agitated and ordered me out immediately. Later, I overheard her speaking with the twins in hushed tones. "The space beneath must remain our secret," she said. "The girl is too observant." Church attendance records from St. John's Episcopal Church on Quarrier Street show that the Vandergriff family attended services regularly, though they never participated in communion. The parish register, examined in 1965 by historian Dr. Robert Collins, contains a curious notation beside the Vandergriff name: abstain from bread and wine, dietary restriction. This was unusual for the period, as refusal to take communion was often viewed with suspicion. By June, Sarah's entries become more detailed about the household dynamics. June 8th, the twins never speak unless spoken to. They move through the house like ghosts, always watching. Today, I caught Vincent staring at me from the stairwell for nearly 10 minutes, without blinking. When I asked if he needed anything, he simply turned and walked away. Mrs. Vandergriff says they are delicate, but there is nothing delicate about the way they watch the staff. Their eyes follow us throughout the house. The other maids cross themselves when the twins pass by. June 15th. Young Thomas confided in me today. He said he's afraid of his brother and sister. "They're not right," he whispered, "not since Mother started giving them the special food." When I asked what he meant, he looked over his shoulder as if afraid of being overheard. "They don't sleep anymore," he said. "I've seen them standing in the hallway outside my room at night just watching me breathe." A newspaper clipping from the Charleston Gazette dated June 12, 1898, reports that Augustus Vandergriff had taken a leave of absence from his business dealings due to an unspecified illness. This coincides with Sarah's observation that Mr. Vandergriff had begun to appear increasingly gaunt and was rarely seen outside his bedroom. The newspaper article quotes a business associate, Mr. Harlan Woodward, as saying, "Mr. Vandergriff assures us his condition is temporary and under the excellent care of Mrs. Vandergriff, who has knowledge of traditional remedies passed down through her family." June 20th, Mr. Vandergriff's health continues to decline. Dr. Matthews visits daily now. I overheard him arguing with Mrs. Vandergriff in the study. He said something about unorthodox treatments and dangerous experimentation. Mrs. Vandergriff assured him that her family traditions were not to be questioned and reminded him of his considerable debt to Mr. Vandergriff's business associates. The doctor left without examining Mr. Vandergriff. That night, I heard screaming from the master bedroom. When I went to investigate, Mrs. Vandergriff was in the hallway. She told me Mr. Vandergriff was experiencing night terrors and that I should return to my quarters immediately. Dr. Matthews' medical records, discovered during a courthouse renovation in 1966, contain sparse notes about his treatment of Augustus Vandergriff. The final entry, dated June 25, 1898, states simply, "Patient beyond conventional treatment. Family refusing hospital care. Symptoms consistent with systematic poisoning, though Mrs. V insists on family remedy. Have advised against continued home treatment without success. Removing myself from case." Doctor. Matthews himself died in 1904, but his grandson, interviewed in 1967, recalled his grandfather speaking of that dreadful Vandergriff business with evident distress even years later. July's entries detail a growing tension in the household. The summer heat had settled over Charleston, making the kitchen unbearably hot. Sarah notes that despite this, Mrs. Vandergriff kept the kitchen stove burning at all hours. July 15th. The heat is oppressive, yet Mrs. Vandergriff insists on keeping the kitchen fire stoked day and night. The smell has changed. It's no longer medicinal, but something far less pleasant, something almost familiar. Today I found a button from what appeared to be a child's coat near the kitchen drain. When I showed it to Mrs. Vandergriff, her face went white. She snatched it from my hand and said I must have been mistaken about where I found it. She then forbade me from cleaning the kitchen floor for the remainder of the week. July 22nd. Something is wrong with this house. The walls seem to absorb sound in unnatural ways. Today, while dusting the library, I overheard Mrs. Vandergriff instructing the twins in the adjacent room. "The preparation must be consumed while still warm," she said. "The essence dissipates quickly once extracted." Victoria asked something I couldn't quite hear, to which Mrs. Vandergriff replied, "Your father refused to understand the necessity. Now he contributes in his own way." When I accidentally knocked over a book, the conversation ceased immediately. I felt their eyes on me through the wall. A curious detail emerges from public records during this period. 3 children from the surrounding neighborhood were reported missing that summer. The police reports discovered during a reorganization of the Charleston Police Department archives in 1965 show that the cases were investigated separately and were attributed to possible drownings in the Kanawha River, as was common during summer months when children would swim unsupervised. No bodies were ever recovered. The missing children were identified as Michael Simmons, age 8, Elizabeth Dougherty, age 10, and James Wilson, age 7. All 3 lived within a half-mile radius of the Vandergriff mansion. More telling, perhaps, is that each disappearance occurred on a night preceding one of Mrs. Vandergriff's elaborate dinner parties, as documented in society pages of the Charleston Daily Mail. Sarah's August entries reveal her growing suspicion and fear. August 3rd. Young Thomas confided in me today. He said he's afraid of the kitchen. He claims to hear scratching sounds coming from beneath the floor at night. When I asked what he meant, he said, "The children who don't go home want to get out." Mrs. Vandergriff overheard our conversation and immediately sent Thomas to his room. She then informed me that Thomas had an overactive imagination and that I was not to indulge his fantasies. She added that servants who listen to children's stories often find themselves seeking new employment. August 10th. The scratching is real. I heard it myself tonight when I was collecting the dinner dishes. A faint but persistent sound coming from beneath the kitchen floor. When I mentioned it to cook, she pretended not to hear me, but her hands shook as she wiped them on her apron. "Some things in this house are best not noticed," she whispered, when Mrs. Vandergriff was out of earshot. If you value your position or your life, forget what you heard. An interview conducted in 1964 with Ida Mae Johnson, who had worked as a laundress for several prominent Charleston families, included this recollection. Nobody wanted to work for the Vandergriffs for long. There was talk among the colored staff about strange sounds in that house. My cousin Esther worked there for 3 weeks in the summer of '98. She left without collecting her wages. Said she'd rather starve than spend another night under that roof. She told me she'd seen Mrs. Vandergriff coming up from beneath the kitchen floor one night, her apron covered in something that wasn't food. Esther left Charleston entirely after that, moved all the way to Cincinnati. By September, Sarah's handwriting in the journal becomes increasingly erratic. September 10th. I know what I saw. While serving breakfast, I noticed a smudge of something dark on Vincent's sleeve. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be dried blood. When I mentioned this to Mrs. Vandergriff, suggesting his shirt needed changing before the day's activities, she calmly responded that Vincent had been helping her in the kitchen. "Family recipes require family blood," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just a small contribution for the greater good." The twins watched me throughout breakfast, their eyes following every movement of my hands. I've started wearing a small cross beneath my uniform. September 15th. Mr. Vandergriff has not been seen for 3 weeks now. Mrs. Vandergriff claims he is convalescing in his bedroom, too weak for visitors. Today I was instructed to take clean linens to the master bedroom. The room was empty, the bed undisturbed. When I reported this to Mrs. Vandergriff, she said Mr. Vandergriff had been moved to the guest bedroom for better air circulation. That room, too, showed no signs of occupation. Yet at dinner, Mrs. Vandergriff had me set a place for him, which remained untouched. The twins exchanged glances whenever their father was mentioned. A delivery record from Carson's butcher shop found in a collection of business ledgers donated to the West Virginia State Museum in 1963 shows that the Vandergriff household had abruptly ceased ordering meat in July of that year. However, their orders for unusual spices and preserving salts from Harmon's General Store increased dramatically, according to a separate ledger from the same collection. Harmon's records show specific requests for items unusual for household cooking: saltpeter, alum, various exotic herbs, and large quantities of Kanawha Valley salt. More telling is an order for 6 porcelain preservation jars, specially imported from Germany, with airtight seals and decorative lids depicting scenes from Greek mythology, specifically the story of Kronos devouring his children. September 22nd. I found the entrance today, while Mrs. Vandergriff was meeting with her mysterious visitor, the tall man in the black coat who comes monthly. I managed to move the heavy rug in the pantry. Beneath it is a small trap door, locked with a key Mrs. Vandergriff keeps on her person at all times. The scratching Thomas mentioned is real. I heard it myself, faint but unmistakable. Something or someone is beneath the kitchen. When I pressed my ear to the floor, I could have sworn I heard a child's voice whispering, "Help me." I replaced the rug just as footsteps approached. The visitor left with a small wrapped package. Mrs. Vandergriff's account book, which I glimpsed while dusting, lists monthly payments to a doctor. I account for special ingredients. Records from the Charleston Customs Office, examined in 1967, show that Eleanor Vandergriff received regular shipments from Eastern Europe, specifically from a region in the Carpathian Mountains. The contents were always listed vaguely as household items or cultural artifacts. The customs agent who processed these shipments, a Mr. Frederick Danner, made a notation in his private ledger discovered among his effects after his death in 1923 that one such package emitted a most unusual and disagreeable odor, not unlike that of a medical specimen preserved in alcohol. October's entries become increasingly desperate. October 5th, I've started saving my wages. I plan to leave at month's end and take Thomas with me. Something is terribly wrong in this house. Mr. Vandergriff hasn't been seen for weeks. Mrs. Vandergriff claims he's recovering in the country, but his clothes still hang in his wardrobe, and his personal items remain untouched. The twins watch me constantly now as if they know what I'm planning. Their eyes follow me from room to room. I've taken to barricading my door at night. October 8th. Today I overheard Victoria speaking to her brother in the garden. "Mother says we'll need another soon," she said. "The essence from the last one is nearly depleted." Vincent nodded and replied, "The maid suspects. I've seen her watching. Perhaps she could contribute." They both turned and stared directly at my window, though I'm certain they couldn't see me behind the curtain. I'm convinced now that Mr. Vandergriff is dead, or worse. I must get Thomas away from here before they do something terrible to him, too. An article in the Charleston Gazette, dated October 9th, 1898, mentions a search for another missing child, 11-year-old Clara Bennett, last seen walking home from school along Virginia Street. The article quotes Police Chief William Montgomery as saying, "We have no reason to suspect foul play. The girl likely wandered to the riverbank and fell in. With the recent rains, the current is quite strong. A small reward was offered for information, but no witnesses came forward." October 12th. I followed Mrs. Vandergriff tonight. After the household retired, I watched from the servant's staircase as she entered the kitchen with a large key. She removed the rug, opened the trapdoor, and descended into the space below. The sounds that followed were unlike anything I've ever heard. Not quite human, not quite animal. When she emerged an hour later, her apron was stained dark, and she was smiling. She carried a covered dish to the twins' room. I heard them dining long past midnight. October 15th. Thomas is terrified. He came to my room before dawn, shaking. He said Victoria and Vincent had stood at the foot of his bed all night watching him. "They want me to join Father," he whispered. "They say I'm ready." I've told him my plan. We will leave together in 2 days when I receive my wages. I've written to my sister in Clendeneen to expect us. Thomas says his mother has been forcing him to drink small amounts of her tonic each day. It makes him dizzy and compliant. I've told him to pretend to drink it but spit it out when no one is watching. The final entry in Sarah's journal, dated October 17th, 1898, reads, "I can't wait any longer. I've secured train tickets for tomorrow morning. Thomas will meet me at the station. I've told him to tell no one. Last night I managed to create an impression of Mrs. Vandergriff's key in a bar of soap. Tomorrow, before I leave, I will know what's beneath the kitchen floor. If anything happens to me, let it be known that Eleanor Vandergriff is not what she appears to be." The missing children, Mr. Vandergriff's illness, the twins' strange behavior, it's all connected to whatever she keeps locked away. I've left a copy of this journal with my sister in Clendeneen as insurance. God forgive me for what I might find. Sarah Blackwood was reported missing on October 20th, 1898. The official police report, filed by Eleanor Vandergriff, stated that Sarah had left without notice, taking with her several valuable silver items from the household. A warrant was issued for her arrest, but she was never found. The case was eventually closed, and Sarah Blackwood was labeled a common thief. The police report, reviewed in 1965, contained several inconsistencies. The inventory of allegedly stolen items changed 3 times in subsequent filings. Initially, Mrs. Vandergriff claimed that only a silver letter opener was missing. A week later, the list expanded to include silver candlesticks and a brooch. By November, the alleged theft had grown to include several pieces of valuable jewelry and family heirlooms. Detective James Morrison, who handled the case, noted in his personal journal, discovered among his effects in 1960 that he found Mrs. Vandergriff's escalating claims suspicious, but was ordered by his superior to close the case without further investigation. Curiously, young Thomas Vandergriff was sent to a boarding school in Richmond, Virginia, the very next week, according to school registration documents discovered during a research project at the University of Virginia in 1967. The admissions letter, signed by Eleanor Vandergriff, requested that Thomas be kept under strict supervision and not be allowed visitors or correspondence without her prior approval. He never returned to Charleston and died at the age of 19, from what his death certificate describes as wasting disease of unknown origin. School records from the Briarwood Academy for Boys show that Thomas was a withdrawn student who rarely spoke to his classmates. His dormitory supervisor, Mr. Harold Wilson, noted in quarterly reports that the boy suffered from frequent nightmares and would often be found sleepwalking, trying to barricade his door with furniture. A school physician's report dated 1904 mentions unusual scarring on the boy's inner arms and torso, consistent with small, precise incisions rather than typical childhood injuries. The investigation into what truly happened to Sarah Blackwood gained momentum in 1962 when her journal was discovered during renovations to the building that had replaced the Vandergriff mansion. The contractor, Harold Meeks, reported finding not only the journal but also evidence of the hidden compartment Sarah had described. According to his statement to local authorities, the space beneath the kitchen was approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, with walls lined with a peculiar clay mixture that had preserved the cold temperature of the room even decades after it had been sealed. "It was the strangest thing I've ever encountered in 30 years of construction," Meeks stated in his report to the Charleston Building Commission. The room had no windows, no proper ventilation beyond a small flue connecting to the old chimney system. The walls weren't brick or wood. They were packed with some kind of clay mixture that had hardened like concrete. The temperature dropped at least 20 degrees when we opened that space, and the smell like nothing I've encountered before. Sweet but rotten at the same time. Inside this chamber, workers discovered several artifacts: children's shoes, buttons, a collection of primitive surgical tools, and what appeared to be a stone altar in the center of the room. Most disturbing were the scratch marks on the interior of the trapdoor, made from the inside. Photographs taken by the police department show deep grooves in the wood, some containing fragments of what laboratory analysis later confirmed to be human fingernails. Forensic analysis conducted in 1963 by the newly established West Virginia State Crime Laboratory revealed that the clay mixture contained high concentrations of sodium chloride, salt, which had been used historically as a preservative. The Charleston salt industry, which had boomed in the 19th century, provided ample access to this resource. More concerning was the discovery of trace amounts of human remains embedded in the clay walls, suggesting the room had been used for purposes far more sinister than food storage. Dr. Lawrence Peterson, who led the forensic examination, wrote in his official report, "The composition of the wall material appears designed specifically for the preservation of organic matter. The salt concentration is consistent with methods used for meat preservation in the pre-refrigeration era. Embedded within this matrix, we identified human hair, bone fragments, and tissue residue from multiple individuals. Based on preliminary analysis, at least 7 distinct DNA profiles were present, most appearing to belong to pre-adolescent humans. Eleanor Vandergriff and the twins had left Charleston abruptly in 1901, according to property records showing the sale of their home to another prominent family. The sale was conducted through an attorney, with the Vandergriffs never appearing in person to sign the final documents. Their destination was never recorded, and no further records of the Vandergriff family exist in West Virginia archives. The buyers, the Harrington family, occupied the home for less than a year before abandoning it, forfeiting their substantial down payment. In a letter to his brother, discovered in family papers in 1966, William Harrington wrote, "The house is untenable. Caroline has not slept a full night since we moved in. The children refuse to enter the kitchen, claiming they hear voices calling to them from beneath the floor. Last week, our youngest daughter, Mary, went missing for 6 hours. We found her in the pantry, attempting to pry up the floorboards with a kitchen knife. When asked why, she said, "The hungry children told me to let them out. We are leaving tomorrow. Financial loss be damned." However, a researcher at Miskatonic University uncovered evidence in 1965 suggesting that a family matching the Vandergriff's description, a widow with adult twins, had appeared in New Orleans society circles around 1902. They reportedly brought with them unique culinary traditions and hosted exclusive dinner parties for the elite of Louisiana society. The social columns of the New Orleans Picayune from that period mention a Mrs. V and her striking children, whose soirees were coveted invitations among the city's upper crust. The researcher, Dr. Martin Chambers, was preparing a comprehensive report on his findings when he unexpectedly abandoned his position and disappeared. His research notes were never recovered, and the university classified his unfinished work in 1968. A colleague, speaking on condition of anonymity, told the Charleston Gazette that Chambers had received a package from New Orleans shortly before his disappearance, a small parcel containing what appeared to be a preserved human finger bone, and a note that reportedly read, "Some appetites never die, neither do we." Local Charleston historian Margaret Holloway attempted to follow up on the Vandergriff case in 1964. She tracked down descendants of the families who had reported missing children in the summer of 1898. According to her notes, now held in the West Virginia Historical Society archives, she discovered that each family had received a substantial financial gift from an anonymous benefactor shortly after their children's disappearances. Each family subsequently relocated from Charleston within a year. The Bennett family, whose daughter Clara disappeared in October 1898, moved to Pittsburgh in early 1899. City directories show they opened a successful dry goods store using capital from an inheritance. The Simmons family, who lost young Michael, relocated to Cincinnati, where property records show they purchased a home in an affluent neighborhood with cash. The Wilsons and Dohertys similarly left Charleston under suddenly improved financial circumstances. Holloway's investigation was abruptly terminated when funding for her research was withdrawn by the Historical Society's Board of Directors. In a personal letter to a colleague, dated November 1964, she wrote, "I'm being watched. Someone doesn't want this story told. The connections between the Vandergriffs and the city's elite run deeper than I imagined. The missing children were not accidents. They were sacrifices to something I don't yet understand. I've secured Sarah's journal in a safe deposit box. If anything happens to me, make sure it sees the light of day." Perhaps the most disturbing discovery in Holloway's notes was a reference to a conversation with Eliza Wilson, aged 86, in 1964, whose brother James had disappeared in 1898. According to Holloway's transcript, Wilson said, "My parents never spoke of James after he vanished. They took the money and moved us away. But I remember something they didn't know. The day before James disappeared, I saw him talking to those twins, the Vandergriff children. They were showing him something in a small box. They told him it was magic. They said if he came to their house the next evening, they would show him how it worked." James never came home from school the next day. Margaret Holloway died in a house fire in December 1964. The fire marshal's report cited faulty wiring as the cause, though neighboring properties were unaffected. Her research notes were reportedly destroyed in the blaze, with only fragments surviving in various archives. The most troubling detail, not included in official reports but mentioned by a firefighter in a 1967 interview with the Charleston Gazette, was that Holloway's body was found in her study, not in her bedroom where she would have been expected at the time of the fire. According to the firefighter, her hands were positioned as if she had been writing when she died, yet no paper or writing implements were found nearby. The most unsettling development in the case came in 1966, when excavation for a new building near the former Vandergriff property, unearthed a mass grave containing the remains of at least 7 individuals, most estimated to be between the ages of 6 and 12. Analysis of the remains indicated they dated to the late 1890s. More disturbing was the evidence that the bones had been meticulously cleaned of flesh before burial, with precise cut marks suggesting a methodical process. Dr. William Harrison, the anthropologist who examined the remains, noted in his preliminary report, "The patterns of incision are consistent with skilled butchery rather than medical dissection. The bones show evidence of having been boiled at high temperatures, likely to remove tissue. Most troubling are the signs that certain bones, particularly the skulls and long bones of the arms, show evidence of having been carefully opened to extract marrow. This suggests ritual rather than medical purpose." The case was quietly closed by local authorities, who attributed the grave to an undocumented cholera outbreak. The remains were reburied in an unmarked section of Spring Hill Cemetery. All records of the discovery were sealed by court order in 1967, ostensibly to prevent public panic over possible health concerns from the century-old remains. Dr. Harrison was removed from the case before completing his analysis. His subsequent attempts to publish his findings in academic journals were unsuccessful. In a letter to a colleague at the Smithsonian Institution, dated August 1967, he wrote, "Something is very wrong here. My research has been suppressed, my lab access restricted. I've been offered a visiting professorship in Australia, very generous terms. I get the distinct impression that certain parties want me as far from Charleston as possible." What happened to Sarah Blackwood? The most compelling theory comes from a deathbed confession recorded by a nurse at Charleston Memorial Hospital in 1969. The patient, identified only as VV in the nurse's personal diary, claimed to be one of the Vandergriff twins. According to the nurse's account, VV described a family tradition dating back generations in the Old World, involving the consumption of specific preparations to achieve extraordinary longevity. The nurse, Emily Reynolds, wrote, "The patient appears to be in his late 40s, though claims to be much older. He speaks with an unusual accent that shifts between aristocratic and something much older. Today, in a moment of clarity between morphine doses, he became agitated and insisted on telling me what he called the recipe for eternal youth. The girl knew too much," Vivi reportedly said. "Mother said we couldn't risk exposure. The kitchen was our temple, our laboratory. The preparations required fresh ingredients, the younger, the more potent. Father refused to participate, so he became part of the preparation instead. The maid found our workshop, so she joined him. Mother always said nothing should go to waste." Reynolds's diary continues. He described a process involving the extraction of essence from living subjects, preferably children, whose life force was supposedly stronger and purer. He spoke of consuming these essences while still warm, claiming this was the secret to his family's longevity. When I asked about Sarah Blackwood, he smiled in a way that made my blood run cold. "She was particularly delicious," he said. "Her curiosity gave her essence a unique flavor. We preserved part of her for special occasions." The nurse who recorded this confession requested a transfer the following day and left Charleston shortly thereafter. Her diary was discovered among her possessions after her death in 1985 and was donated to the West Virginia State Archives by a relative who had no knowledge of its contents. The patient, identified as VV, disappeared from the hospital before formal identification could be established. Hospital records show he was admitted for treatment of an unusual blood disorder that caused accelerated aging when he stopped receiving regular, specialized nutrition. The attending physician, Dr. Samuel Mitchell, noted in the patient's chart, "Subject exhibits paradoxical cellular behavior. Tissue samples show evidence of extreme age at the cellular level, yet demonstrate remarkable regenerative properties when exposed to certain enzymes. Patient is evasive about medical history, but mentions family remedies that have maintained his health for longer than you would believe." Blood work shows anomalies I cannot explain with current medical knowledge. The Vandergriff mansion was demolished in 1970 to make way for commercial development. Construction workers reported numerous equipment failures and unexplained accidents during the demolition process. The foreman, Joseph Delancey, kept a log of incidents that included power tools failing without explanation, workers experiencing sudden nausea or dizziness in certain areas of the site, and multiple instances of equipment being found rearranged overnight, despite security measures. The kitchen area, in particular, proved problematic. Concrete poured over the foundation repeatedly cracked and settled unevenly. Eventually, that section of the property was paved over and converted into a parking lot, which remains to this day. Businesses that have occupied the commercial building constructed on the site have reported unusual phenomena, particularly in areas closest to where the kitchen once stood. Employees describe cold spots, unexplained noises, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Visitors to the site occasionally report a persistent cold spot near the southeast corner of the lot, regardless of the season or weather conditions. Others claim to hear faint scratching sounds when standing in that area at night. These reports are, of course, unverified and likely the result of the location's grim reputation among those familiar with the case. The most recent development came in 1968, when a woman claiming to be Sarah Blackwood's great-niece contacted the Charleston Historical Society. She produced a weathered envelope that had been passed down through her family with instructions that it should only be opened if questions about Sarah's fate ever resurfaced. Inside was a single page, apparently torn from Sarah's journal, containing an entry not found in the recovered journal. The page read, "I know now what Mrs. Vandergriff has been doing. The chamber beneath the kitchen is not just a storage room, it's a processing room. The children she takes, the ingredients she collects, they all serve one purpose, the preservation and nourishment of the family." Mr. Vandergriff discovered the truth and threatened exposure. Now he's gone, and the twins have been consuming his essence in their mother's preparations. They believe it grants them his strength, his life force. Mrs. Vandergriff spoke of a recipe passed down through generations, requiring specific ingredients that only children can provide. She calls it the sustenance. I've seen the twins change after consuming these meals. Their eyes grow sharper, their skin more luminous. Mrs. Vandergriff appears decades younger than her known age. Whatever unholy science or belief drives their actions, I cannot stand by. Tomorrow I will take Thomas and flee. If you are reading this and I have disappeared, know that I did not abandon my post or steal from my employers. Look beneath the kitchen floor. Look for those who went missing. Look for me. This page was authenticated by handwriting experts in 1969 as consistent with the writing in the recovered journal. Its existence suggests that Sarah had indeed suspected the worst and had taken precautions to ensure the truth might eventually come to light. The great-niece, Judith Blackwood, provided additional family history during a recorded interview now preserved in the state archives. My grandmother always said her Aunt Sarah was no thief. She said the Vandergriffs were not right and that they ate what should not be eaten. For years, I thought these were just the superstitious ramblings of an old woman, but she kept that envelope locked away, made me promise to keep it safe. She said someday someone would ask questions about Sarah, and when they did, I should make sure the truth was known. When asked if her family had any other information about Sarah's fate, Judith became visibly uncomfortable. After some hesitation, she produced a small locket that had belonged to her grandmother. Inside was a tiny scrap of fabric. My grandmother claimed this was from Sarah's apron. She said it arrived in the mail a month after Sarah disappeared. There was no note, no return address, just this scrap of cloth stained with something dark. Grandmother kept it as proof that something terrible had happened. Analysis of the fabric in 1969 confirmed it was consistent with servants' uniforms from the late 19th century. The stain, though degraded by time, tested positive for human blood. The case of Sarah Blackwood and the Vandergriff family has never been officially resolved. The evidence, fragmented across decades and scattered through various archives, points to horrors that Charleston society seemingly preferred to forget. The disappearances, the hidden chamber, the unusual family practices all suggest a darkness that lurked beneath the veneer of Gilded Age prosperity in this West Virginia city. Those who have studied the case note the consistent pattern of interference whenever the investigation gained momentum. From the convenient death of Margaret Holloway to the sealing of records about the mass grave, from the disappearance of Dr. Chambers to the demolition of the mansion itself, forces seemed aligned to keep the full truth buried. Perhaps most telling is the fate of those who attempted to investigate the case over the years. In addition to Holloway and Chambers, at least 3 other researchers experienced unusual setbacks or tragedies after showing interest in the Vandergriff story. James Wilson, a graduate student at West Virginia University, who began researching the case for his dissertation in 1966, withdrew from the program after reportedly suffering from vivid nightmares and persistent feelings of being watched. Catherine Mendoza, a journalist who attempted to write a feature on the case for the Charleston Gazette in 1967, was hospitalized for acute paranoia after claiming to receive packages containing children's teeth at her home address. The newspaper subsequently canceled the story. Dr. Robert Collins, who examined church records related to the Vandergriffs, suffered a stroke in 1965 that left him unable to speak or write. His notes on the case disappeared from his office during his hospitalization. Today, the corner of Virginia Street and Kanawha Boulevard bears no marker or memorial to indicate what may have transpired there in 1898. The parking lot that covers the site of the Vandergriff kitchen sees daily use, its patrons unaware of what may still lie beneath the layers of concrete and asphalt. The Journal of Sarah Blackwood remains in the West Virginia State Archives, accessible only by special permission and academic credentials. Those who have viewed it report that the final pages show signs of having been written in haste, with increasing pressure applied to the paper, as if the writer sensed time was running out. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the case is not what is known, but what remains unexplained. If the confession attributed to VV is to be believed, then the Vandergriff twins, who would have been in their 80s by the 1960s, appeared young enough that a hospital nurse recorded no suspicion about their age. This suggests that whatever practices the family engaged in may have produced the effects they sought. More troubling is the question of legacy. Did the Vandergriff traditions continue elsewhere? The brief appearance of a similar family in New Orleans, followed by Dr. Chambers' disappearance while investigating them, suggests the possibility that Eleanor Vandergriff and her twins may have simply relocated their activities rather than abandoned them. Records from various cities along the eastern seaboard and Gulf Coast between 1902 and 1950 contain scattered reports of missing children coinciding with the arrival of wealthy, reclusive families with unusual dietary practices. These cases, individually dismissed as runaways or accidents, form a pattern that some researchers have attempted to connect to the Vandergriff case. However, those investigations have invariably stalled due to missing records, uncooperative officials, or the unexpected withdrawal of researchers from their projects. The last known reference to the Vandergriff name appears in a Miami Society column from 1958, mentioning an elegant dinner party hosted by the ageless Vandergriff siblings, recently returned from European travels. The columnist noted their remarkable youthfulness and the exclusive nature of their gatherings, where guests were served unique preparations based on old family recipes. That column was retracted in the following day's paper, with the editor citing factual inaccuracies. The columnist who wrote the piece left the newspaper shortly thereafter and reportedly relocated to South America. As for Sarah Blackwood, no trace of her has ever been found beyond her journal. No record of her boarding a train exists. No body matching her description was ever discovered. Her final fate, like so much of this case, remains shrouded in mystery. A persistent rumor among longtime Charleston residents suggests that certain wealthy families in the city still possess Vandergriff recipes, though most dismiss this as urban legend. Yet occasionally cases of missing children go unsolved and whispers resurface about old appetites and special ingredients. Those who walk past the parking lot at Virginia Street and Kanawha Boulevard today may notice nothing unusual, but some claim that on particularly quiet nights, especially in October, the faint sound of scratching can still be heard from beneath the pavement, as if something or someone is still trying to escape from a chamber that official Charleston history insists never existed. The kitchen secrets, it seems, remain sealed beneath layers of concrete, bureaucracy, and collective denial, a dark chapter in Charleston's history that powerful interests have worked for generations to keep closed. And perhaps, for the peace of mind of those who call the city home, that is where some secrets should remain. And yet, the journal of a brave young maid named Sarah Blackwood ensures that the truth, however fragmented, survives. Her words echo across the decades, a testament to horrors witnessed and a warning unheeded. In her final known entry, she wrote, "Some hungers cannot be satisfied. Some appetites only grow with feeding. God help us all if what I suspect is true." For those inclined to look deeper into this case, a word of caution. Archives close. Records disappear. Researchers abandon their work, and sometimes those who ask too many questions about the Vandergriff family and their special recipes find themselves the subjects of unwanted attention. The scratching beneath the pavement continues. The hunger, perhaps, remains unsatisfied.